Welcome, listeners, to tonight's tale. If you're alone, you might want to leave a light on. This story comes from a small town with a dark secret, one that's been buried for years, until now. Our story begins with Amy Wright, a woman whose life takes a dramatic turn when she inherits an old Victorian house from her grandmother, nestled in a remote village. But this inheritance comes with an unexpected, eerie condition. Amy Wright was a city girl through and through. She thrived in the hustle and bustle of the urban jungle, with its never-ending noise and endless energy. But life has a funny way of flipping the script when you least expect it. After her grandmother's passing, Amy found herself the sole inheritor of a sprawling old Victorian house in a remote, sleepy village miles away from the city. This wasn't just any house. It was a towering Gothic structure that loomed over the landscape, its gabled roofs and ornate woodwork telling tales of a bygone era. Amy had never been close to her grandmother and barely remembered visiting the house as a child. The few memories she did have were vague and unsettling: a dark hallway here, a strange sound there, the cold, unwelcoming feel of the place. But now, this house was hers. The lawyer's letter was clear. To claim her inheritance, she had to live in the house for a full year. If she left before then, she would lose everything. Amy was at a crossroads in her life. Her recent breakup and the constant stress of her advertising job had left her exhausted and craving change. Maybe this house could be her fresh start. The thought of selling it afterward and pocketing a tidy sum didn't hurt either. So she packed her bags, said goodbye to the city, and headed to the country, not knowing that she was stepping into the unknown. The village of Willow Creek was a stark contrast to the city. Its narrow streets were lined with quaint cottages, their gardens overflowing with wildflowers. The locals were polite but distant, casting curious glances at the newcomer. The house stood at the edge of the village, surrounded by tall, dense woods that seemed to close in around it. As Amy approached, she felt a shiver run down her spine. It was as if the house was watching her, waiting. Despite its outward grandeur, the interior of the house was a different story. Dust coated every surface, cobwebs hung in every corner, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew and neglect. The house had been empty for years, forgotten and abandoned. But it wasn't just the physical decay that unsettled Amy. There was something else, a feeling she couldn't quite put her finger on. It was as if the house was alive, breathing, its walls whispering secrets she wasn't meant to hear. She spent her first few days cleaning and sorting through her grandmother's belongings, uncovering the life of a woman she hardly knew. Photographs of a young, smiling grandmother, letters from old friends, a collection of antique jewelry. Each item told a story, revealing a side of her grandmother Amy had never seen. But there were also strange, unsettling things. An old, rusted key with no matching lock, a bundle of dried herbs tied with a black ribbon, a faded photograph of the house with the attic windows boarded up. Then she found the letter. It was hidden in a drawer in her grandmother's study, an old, faded envelope addressed to her, in her grandmother's shaky handwriting. The letter was brief, but its message was clear. Amy, my dear, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this in person, but there's something you need to know. Never, under any circumstances, go into the attic. Please trust me. With love, Grandma. Why would her grandmother warn her about the attic? What was up there that was so dangerous? Questions swirled in Amy's mind, but she tried to push them aside. The house was old, and old houses had attics full of forgotten junk, right? Maybe her grandmother was just being overly cautious. But as the sun set and the shadows grew longer, Amy couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had planned to get a good night's sleep and start fresh in the morning, but sleep wouldn't come. The house was too quiet, too still. And then she heard it, a faint whisper. At first, it was just a soft murmur, barely audible. She thought it was the wind rustling through the trees outside, until it called her name. Amy bolted upright, her heart pounding. The whisper was soft and eerie, like a distant echo. She strained her ears, trying to make out the words, but they were just out of reach, slipping through her grasp like smoke. She told herself it was just her imagination, a trick of the mind brought on by the stress of the move and the unsettling atmosphere of the house. But deep down, she knew better. There was something in the house with her. She tried to ignore it, pulling the covers over her head and squeezing her eyes shut, willing herself to sleep. But the whispering continued, growing louder and more insistent. It was like a chant, a low, rhythmic murmur that seemed to seep through the walls, wrapping around her like a shroud. She couldn't take it anymore. She threw off the covers and got out of bed, determined to find the source of the sound. She followed the sound down the dark, winding hallway, her bare feet cold against the wooden floor. The whispering grew louder as she approached the attic door at the end of the hall. The closer she got, the clearer the voices became. They were pleading, begging for something, but she couldn't make out the words. Her grandmother's warning echoed in her mind, but curiosity got the best of her. She had to know what was up there. She placed her hand on the doorknob, feeling a chill run through her fingers. As she turned it, the whispers stopped. Silence. A heavy, oppressive silence that filled her with dread. She hesitated, her heart racing, her breath shallow. Part of her wanted to turn back, to run as far away from the house as possible. But another part, a darker part, urged her to go on. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The attic was dark and musty, filled with old furniture and boxes piled haphazardly. The air was thick with dust, and the only light came from a small, dirty window on the far wall. As she moved deeper into the room, the floorboards creaked under her weight, breaking the silence like a gunshot. She held her breath, listening for any sign of movement, but all she heard was the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She felt a surge of disappointment mixed with relief. There was nothing up here, just a bunch of old junk left behind by her grandmother. Maybe the whispering had been in her head after all. She turned to leave, but as she did, something caught her eye. In the corner of the room, partially hidden behind a stack of boxes, was a small, ornate chest. It was covered in a thick layer of dust, as if it hadn't been touched in years. She knelt down and brushed the dust away, revealing intricate carvings of strange symbols she didn't recognize. The chest was locked, but the lock was old and rusty. She hesitated for a moment, then grabbed a nearby candlestick and used it to pry the lock open. It snapped with a loud click, and she slowly lifted the lid. Inside, she found a collection of old, leather-bound books and a bundle of yellowed papers tied with a black ribbon. She picked up one of the books and opened it, revealing pages filled with strange symbols and diagrams. It looked like some kind of ancient text, but she couldn't make sense of it. As she flipped through the pages, a single word caught her eye. Curse. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickly set the book aside. She picked up the bundle of papers and untied the ribbon, revealing a series of letters written in her grandmother's handwriting. They were dated over 50 years ago, and as she read through them, she felt a chill run down her spine. The letters spoke of a dark presence that lived in the attic, a malevolent force that fed on fear and despair. Her grandmother had tried to keep it at bay, using rituals and spells she had learned from the old books. But over the years, the darkness had grown stronger, and her grandmother had become desperate. She had boarded up the attic windows, hoping to trap the evil inside, but it hadn't worked. The darkness had continued to grow, feeding on the house itself, until it had become too powerful to contain. Amy realized that the whispers she had heard were not just in her head. They were real, and they were getting louder. She quickly put the papers back in the chest and closed the lid, her hands shaking. She backed away from the chest, her eyes darting around the room, looking for any sign of movement. She had to get out of there. She turned and ran out of the attic, slamming the door behind her. She raced down the hallway and back to her room, her heart pounding in her chest. She locked the door and leaned against it, trying to catch her breath. She knew she had to leave the house, but she couldn't bring herself to move. She was frozen with fear, her mind racing with thoughts of the dark presence in the attic. She had to do something, but what? Over the next few days, Amy tried to go about her life as normally as possible. She cleaned the house, explored the village, and tried to ignore the strange sounds and feelings that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. But the more she tried to push them away, the more they seemed to creep back in. She could feel the darkness lurking in the corners, watching her, waiting. She couldn't sleep at night, the whispers keeping her awake. They were louder now, more insistent, like a chorus of voices screaming inside her head. She knew she had to do something, but she didn't know what. She needed answers, but she didn't know where to find them. One afternoon, as she was searching through the basement, she found a hidden compartment behind a loose brick in the wall. Inside, she found a small, leather-bound diary. It was old and worn, the pages yellowed with age. She opened it, and her heart skipped a beat. It was her grandmother's diary. The entries were disturbing, filled with descriptions of strange rituals and dark magic. Her grandmother had written about the curse, about how it had plagued the house for generations. She had tried to break it, but she had failed. The darkness had consumed her, driving her to the brink of madness. She had become obsessed with the attic, convinced that it held the key to ending the curse. But every time she tried to confront the darkness, it had only grown stronger. Amy's hands trembled as she read the final entry. It was dated the day before her grandmother's death. "I can't hold on much longer," it read. "The darkness is too strong. It's taken everything from me. I can feel it pulling me in, dragging me down into the abyss. I have to end this. I have to stop it before it's too late. If you're reading this, Amy, please forgive me. I'm so sorry." Amy closed the diary, tears streaming down her face. Her grandmother had been trying to protect her, but she had failed. The darkness had claimed her, just like it was claiming Amy now. She had to do something, but she didn't know what. She needed help, but she didn't know who to turn to. She decided to visit the village library, hoping to find some information about the house and its history. The library was small and dusty, filled with old books and newspapers. The librarian, an elderly woman with a kind face, greeted her with a warm smile. Amy explained her situation, and the librarian's smile faded. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said softly. "Your grandmother was a good woman. She didn't deserve what happened to her." The librarian led Amy to a back room filled with old records and documents. "The house you inherited has a dark history," she said. It's been in your family for generations, but it's also been the site of many tragedies. Strange things have happened there, things that can't be explained. People have disappeared, gone mad, even died. Your grandmother was the last to live there, and she was never the same after she moved in. Amy felt a chill run down her spine. Do you know anything about the attic? She asked. The librarian nodded. The attic is where it all started, she said. There was a man a long time ago who lived in that house. He was a sorcerer, a practitioner of dark magic. He performed a ritual in the attic, one that went horribly wrong. He unleashed a dark force, a malevolent entity that's been trapped in the house ever since. It feeds on fear and despair, and it's been growing stronger over the years. Your grandmother tried to contain it, but she couldn't. Now, it's up to you. Amy's heart raced as the librarian's words sank in. She was trapped in a house with a dark force, a force that wanted her dead. She had to find a way to stop it, but she didn't know how. She thanked the librarian and left the library, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. Back at the house, Amy sat down at the kitchen table, her mind racing. She had to find a way to end the curse, to banish the darkness for good. But how? She picked up her grandmother's diary and began to read through the entries again, searching for anything that might help. And then she saw it a ritual, a way to banish the darkness. But it required a sacrifice, a blood offering. She felt a chill run down her spine as she read the words. Could she really do it? Could she really offer up her own blood to end the curse? She didn't know, but she had to try. Amy couldn't take it anymore. The whispers were getting louder, more insistent. They were driving her mad, filling her head with fear and despair. She had to end it, once and for all. She grabbed a flashlight and a kitchen knife and headed up the stairs to the attic. Her heart was pounding, her breath shallow, but she was determined. She had to end this nightmare. The attic door was cold to the touch, and as she pushed it open, a rush of icy air hit her face. The room was dark and cluttered, filled with old furniture and boxes. But in the corner, she saw it a shadow, darker than the rest, moving slowly towards her. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of voices screaming inside her head. She swung the knife wildly, but it went right through the shadow. The shadow stopped, and for a moment, everything was still. Then it spoke, a single word that chilled Amy to the bone. Release. Amy realized what she had to do. She rushed downstairs, grabbing the diary and flipping to the ritual page. The last entry was a ritual, a way to banish the darkness for good. It required a sacrifice, a blood offering. Her hands trembled as she read the words, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty. She took a deep breath and picked up the kitchen knife, holding it over her palm. Her heart was pounding, her mind screaming at her to stop. But she knew she had to do it. She had to end this. She pressed the blade against her skin and sliced, feeling a sharp pain as the blood began to flow. She held her hand over the attic floor, letting the blood drip onto the dusty floorboards, forming a dark crimson pool. As the blood seeped into the wood, the whispers grew louder, their voices rising in a cacophony of anguish and rage. Amy's vision blurred as she continued the ritual, her blood mixing with the ancient symbols carved into the floor. She recited the words from the diary, her voice trembling, barely above a whisper. She could feel the darkness closing in around her, pressing against her, suffocating her. But she couldn't stop. She had to finish what her grandmother had started. As she spoke the final words, the air around her grew colder, and the whispers turned into screams. The shadow lunged at her, its form twisting and writhing as it tried to envelop her. But Amy didn't flinch. She held her ground, her blood-soaked hand still extended over the floor. She could feel the darkness pulling at her, trying to drag her down, but she resisted with every ounce of strength she had left. The room shook violently, and the shadows writhed and twisted, filling the attic with a thick, suffocating darkness. Amy could feel it seeping into her skin, clawing at her soul, but she kept chanting the words from the diary. Her voice grew louder, stronger, defying the evil force that surrounded her. The darkness seemed to hesitate, its shape flickering like a dying flame. She knew the ritual was working, but she wasn't sure how much longer she could hold on. Suddenly, the attic window shattered, and a gust of icy wind blew in, scattering the papers and debris around her. The darkness recoiled, retreating from the light that now streamed in through the broken glass. The screams of the whispers became a high-pitched wail, like the howl of a dying animal. Amy fell to her knees, her strength failing, her vision fading. She had done it, but at what cost? Her head swam, her body numb, as she watched the darkness pull back, retreating to the far corner of the attic. It writhed and twisted, struggling against the force of the ritual. Amy could see its shape more clearly, now a mass of shadows, tangled and knotted together, a grotesque figure that was barely human. It reached out to her, its hand stretching towards her like a twisted claw, but it couldn't reach her. The light was too strong, pushing it back into the corner, holding it in place. Amy's breath came in ragged gasps as she watched the darkness retreat further, its form fading, becoming thinner, more transparent. She knew she had to finish the ritual to seal the darkness away for good. She grabbed the diary and struggled to her feet, her legs shaking beneath her. She stepped forward, her hand still bleeding, and pressed it against the cold wooden wall of the attic. She recited the final words, her voice steady, filled with resolve. The symbols on the floor began to glow, a bright, burning light that filled the room, casting long shadows across the walls. The darkness let out one final, agonizing scream as it was pulled back, sucked into the very fabric of the house, trapped once more behind the attic walls. The light flared brighter, blinding her, and then, in an instant, it was gone. The attic fell silent. The darkness vanquished. Amy collapsed to the floor, her body exhausted, her mind numb. She lay there for what felt like hours, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and shallow. She had done it. She had banished the darkness, but at what cost? Her grandmother was gone, and she was alone, trapped in a house that was now just a shell, empty and hollow. Slowly, she pulled herself up, using the wall for support. Her hand throbbed where she had cut herself, and she could feel the blood drying on her skin. She made her way to the broken window, the cold air stinging her face. She looked out at the village below, the streets empty, the houses dark. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the ground. She knew she couldn't stay here any longer. The house was no longer a home, but a prison. She made her way downstairs, her steps slow and deliberate. She needed to clean up, to bandage her hand, but she couldn't bring herself to care. She walked through the empty rooms, her eyes lingering on the old furniture, the dusty photographs, the faded wallpaper. Everything felt so distant, like a memory from another life. She reached the front door and paused, her hand resting on the cold metal doorknob. She took a deep breath, then opened the door and stepped outside. The village was silent, the streets empty. As she walked away from the house, her steps slow and heavy. She didn't know where she was going or what she was going to do, but she knew she couldn't stay here. She had to leave, to find a new place, a new life. She glanced back at the house one last time, its dark silhouette looming against the dawn sky. It was over. She had done what she needed to do. The curse was broken, and the darkness was gone. But as she turned away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching her, waiting. Amy left the village that day, never to return. She found a small apartment in the city, far away from Willow Creek and the haunted houses that had nearly consumed her. She tried to move on, to forget the horrors she had faced, but the memories lingered, haunting her dreams. She knew she would never be free of the darkness, not completely. It was a part of her now, a shadow that would follow her wherever she went. Months passed, and Amy slowly began to rebuild her life. She got a new job, made new friends, and tried to put the past behind her. She threw herself into her work, burying herself in projects and deadlines, trying to forget the house and the darkness that had nearly destroyed her. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the memories. They were always there, lurking in the back of her mind, waiting to resurface. One day, while she was cleaning her apartment, she found the diary. It had been hidden away in a box of old things, forgotten and untouched. She hesitated for a moment, then opened it, flipping through the pages. The words were still there, the ink faded but legible, a record of her grandmother's descent into madness and despair. She knew she should throw it away, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. It was a part of her now, a reminder of the darkness she had faced and the strength she had found to overcome it. As she closed the diary, a single sheet of paper fell out, fluttering to the floor. She picked it up, her heart skipping a beat as she recognized her grandmother's handwriting. It was a letter, dated just a few days before her death. "Amy, my dear," it read, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I'm sorry for everything, for the pain and the fear I caused you. I tried to protect you, but I failed. The darkness is strong, but so are you. You have the strength to overcome it, to banish it for good. I believe in you. With all my love, Grandma." Amy felt a tear roll down her cheek as she read the words. She knew her grandmother had tried her best, had fought against the darkness with everything she had. And now it was up to Amy to carry on that fight, to keep the darkness at bay. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the diary, then put the diary back in the box. She knew she would never forget what had happened, but she also knew she couldn't let it define her. She had to move on, to find a new purpose, a new life. Amy stood up, her resolve firm. She would not let the darkness control her. She would not let it win. She had faced her fears and come out the other side, stronger and more determined than ever. She would build a new life, a better life, one free from the shadows of the past. She would honor her grandmother's memory by living the life she had always wanted, by finding happiness and peace. And she would never, ever look back. As Amy settled into her new life, the memories of the house and the darkness began to fade. She made new friends, found a job she loved, and even started dating again. She felt like she was finally moving on, finally leaving the past behind. But the shadows of Willow Creek were never far away, always lurking in the corners of her mind, waiting for the right moment to strike. One evening, as she was getting ready for bed, she heard a noise, a soft whisper, barely audible, coming from the other room. Her heart skipped a beat, and she froze, listening. The whisper came again, louder this time, a voice she recognized all too well. It was the same voice she had heard in the attic, the same dark, malevolent whisper that had haunted her dreams. She felt a chill run down her spine as the whispers grew louder, filling the room with their dark, sinister presence. Amy backed away, her eyes wide with fear. The darkness had followed her. It had found her, even here, in her new apartment, in her new life. She could feel it, creeping up behind her, its cold, clammy fingers reaching out to grab her. She turned and ran, but there was nowhere to go. The darkness was everywhere, surrounding her, closing in on her. As she stumbled back, her hand brushed against something cold and hard. She looked down and saw the diary lying open on the floor. She must have knocked it over in her panic. The pages fluttered in the breeze, and she saw the symbols glowing faintly, the same symbols she had used in the ritual to banish the darkness. She knew she had to act fast. She grabbed the diary and began to chant, her voice trembling but determined. With one final desperate scream, the darkness vanished, leaving the room silent and still. Amy collapsed to the floor, her body shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had done it. She had banished the darkness, once and for all. But she knew it wasn't over. The darkness would always be there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. She would have to be vigilant to keep the darkness at bay, but she was ready. She had faced her fears and come out the other side, stronger and more determined than ever. Amy got to her feet, her resolve firm. She would not let the darkness control her. She would not let it win. She had faced her fears and come out the other side, stronger and more determined than ever. She would build a new life, a better life, one free from the shadows of the past. She would honor her grandmother's memory by living the life she had always wanted, by finding happiness and peace. And she would never, ever look back. Years passed, and Amy's life slowly returned to normal. She found love, started a family, and built a successful career. She moved far away from Willow Creek, far away from the haunted house that had nearly destroyed her. She never spoke of the darkness, never told anyone what had happened, but she never forgot. The memories were always there, lurking in the back of her mind, a reminder of the darkness she had faced and the strength she had found to overcome it. And though the darkness was always there, lurking in the shadows, Amy knew she had the strength to face it. She had fought it once, and she could fight it again. She was not afraid. She was ready. She was strong, and she would never, ever give up. And so, Amy lived her life, a life free from the darkness, a life filled with love, happiness, and peace. She had faced her fears, confronted the darkness, and come out the other side stronger and more determined than ever. She had found her strength, her purpose, and her peace. And she knew that, no matter what happened, she would never let the darkness win. This concludes our story. Thank you for listening, and remember, no matter how dark the night may seem, There's always a light at the end of the tunnel. Stay strong, stay brave, and never, ever give up.